Hello, my name is Carl Surrey and this is a video tutorial for two Facebook groups, fans of Serif software and Affinity Designer and Photo group. Now, the title of this tutorial is a beginner's look at the clone brush tool, and the clone brush tool icon is this one over here. Just looks like a sort of rubber stamp, which is why in some programs it's called the clone stamp tool, I believe, but in Affinity Photo it is the clone brush tool, and you can access it by pressing S on the keyboard. Now basically what this will do is you select an area of an image and you clone that area to cover up an area that you want to get rid of, or you can clone an area and duplicate it somewhere else on your image that you want to sort of have more than one version of. So this is like the old usage for clone tools. So I would look at that first, and then I will sort of show you how sort of things have slightly progressed since then. And let me zoom in to this image. This is an image I took of where I live, Walton on the Naze in England, and there's these blue stains on this white pillar here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove those using the clone brush tool. So once selected, I'm going to have the opacity at 100% and hardness at 0. Now, like most brush tools, you can increase and decrease the size of the brush circle by the square bracket keys, which are the two keys next to the P key on the keyboard. So all you need to do is select an area that you want that is a good area, and you hold down the Alt key. I'm not certain whether this is the same on the Mac, as I've never used a Mac, but whatever the equivalent of the Alt key on a Mac is, you hold down that key and then click, and then if I put this in the blue sky, you can now see that inside that brush tip is all the pixels that was selected, where that cross now is. So wherever I place this, it will add those pixels to that area. And if I move this circle up now, you can see that the cross will also move up and select a different area to clone from, so you're not always getting the same pattern. It's not always repeating. If you want to clone from a different area, you just again press down the Alt key and click, and that cross will now be further up this post. So I could add a slight different bit of texture, so that is that blue area now gone. Now because I think the brush was a bit too wide, and I've just slightly affected those lamps there, but this is only for demonstration purposes, so you can see what that has done. So I'm going to press Ctrl and Z a few times to bring that back. Right, so that's back to where it was. You probably would have done better to have done that on a separate layer rather than on the actual picture, just in case you do make mistakes like what I did, and then it's slightly easier to correct. So you could just add a new pixel layer, and from the options above up here it's got source, and next to that it's got current layer, but if you select current layer and below, this will this is still set on where I had it before. So if I paint and clone over that area now, that is actually on the pixel layer above, because if I turn that on and off, you can see that that is not affecting the actual original. So that's probably the safer way to use the clone tool. Now let me delete this layer and bring that back. And like I said at the beginning, this is like the more traditional way of using the clone tool. With the Affinity Photo and I think the newer sort of Photoshop and possibly Elements, they now have a tool which is in Affinity Photo. It's called the Inpainting brush, which does sort of take away a lot of the things that the clone tool does, and in fact it uses the keyboard shortcut is J. If I click on that and I paint over that area, the program will decide for itself the where to select the pixels to replace the ones that you want to remove. So in a sense, Inpainting is probably better now than the clone tool used to be. So if I press Ctrl and Z a couple of times, bring that back. So in that sense, for removing blemishes and what have you, it's probably best to now go with the Inpainting brush tool. But the clone brush tool still has its uses, because, let me lower the brush size down. Say for example, there's a light up here. If I wanted to have another light over here, you couldn't do that with like an Inpainting brush tool. So if I come over that light, press the Alt key, I could then click and have two lights in the picture, which is something you couldn't do with the Inpainting brush. The Inpainting brush is better at sort of possibly removing areas, but you can still use the clone tool for replacing, duplicating and making a new version of that somewhere else. So like this bird up here, I could have gone with that bird and added a second or third. I would have to keep resampling that bird, but I could add extra birds to the image. So that is quickly what the clone brush tool does. Now I just want to sort of have a look at some of the options that you get with the clone brush tool. So let me just press Ctrl and Z a few more times to get rid of the things that I've just done. Now I just want to have a quick look at Serif's older PC product, which is Photo Plus. And see, on Photo Plus, the clone tool, you have some options up here like blend mode, opacity, brush size, flow, aligned, use all layers, and preview. If you go to Adobe Elements, which is the sort of cut down version of Photoshop, and their clone stamp tool, they've got sample all layers, size, opacity, blend mode, aligned, and the brush sizes and what have you. So those two programs have very similar options, and they're not that many options. So let me close that down, I don't need that now. But if you look up here in Affinity Photo, you have those similar options of the brush size, the opacity, the flow, the hardness, but then we start having a few more options that aren't available in those other programs. So I just want to have a quick look at some of these options. So the first thing I do want to just touch on before I go over and have a look at these is the hardness setting. Now, we had someone recently on one of the Facebook groups who was having problems with the clone brush tool because it was sort of showing up as like full circles almost, and she did discover that it's because her hardness was set at 100. So if I zoom in here and I clone from there, it's not too bad. It doesn't really show up so much on there, but it does show up here on the blue sky. As you can see, you can see the whole circle. It sort of isn't doing what it needs to do, but if you had the hardness down to 0 and you're doing the same thing, you're not getting those circles. Would help if I stopped moving around so much. Let's get rid of all of those and I'll re-sample an area. As you can see, you can't see the actual brush edges because the hardness is set to 0. It is blending in better. Right, so moving on to the other options. Now I have sort of demonstrated the current layer and below. You do also have layers beneath, so if you have more than one layer, it can sample from all the layers beneath. At least that's how I understand it. It's not something I've really gone into. I really only ever use current layer or current layer and the one below, which is, like I said, if you have a blank layer above, which is probably the safest way to use the clone brush tool. Right, let's just bring that back. Right. Okay, so I've had a quick look at this current layer and below and source options. So we've got the current layer below and layer beneath. And this one next to it, which is add global source, is blanked out. Now sometimes I can get this to work and sometimes I can't, but I'll try this again. I've got another image open here, which is an image I got from pixabay.com, and again it's set up on the clone tool, and I'm going to make the brush big enough to get both her eyes in, like that. I'm going to hold down the Alt key and click into there, and now you can see this has got add global source has now become highlighted. So I'll click on that and it shows a representation in this new panel that is open of the girl here. So if I come back to this image here and I highlight that and then select global, it should, let me see, and I've now highlighted that girl's image from the other image. I can now place onto this image. Let me zoom out and I could just continue to sample. It's a bit difficult because obviously I can't see exactly where I'm sampling from on the other image, so you've really got to be sort of fairly certain of what it is you're trying to clone in from one image to another. But basically that is that, and because I've got this on a blank layer, if I come to the move tool I could move this around, something like that. So that is an option which you can use to clone something from one image into another image. So if you're doing a composite image, for example, you could clone a boat from one image and put it onto a picture of the sea in another image. But it really does need to be sort of a well-defined area that you can work from, because you're sort of doing it blind. But it does work. And then when you've finished with this, you can just highlight the girl and then click on the delete global source, and that will shut down. So that is that option. Let me come back to the clone brush tool. Right, so let me go back to this picture of the girl here, and I'm going to be working on the current layer. And what I'm going to do is I'll lower the brush size just so I can get one eye selected. Let's go with that. Press the Alt key and click that as my source. I'm going to add a pixel layer, and then I'm going to use current layer and below. So I could put, give her a third eye or whatever like that, but I want to look at some of these other options up here, because you've got the rotation. So you could alter the rotation of that. So as you can see, the eye is no longer in the same rotation as when I selected this originally. So let me put the rotation back down. Next one is scale. Let me let's get rid of that. Like that. And I will select this area by Alt and click, and scale I'm going to raise from 100. So there you can see is it increased the size of that area to make all the pixels and what have you much bigger. So I'm going to get rid of all those again. Put this back to 100. And the next one is flip. So you've got horizontal, vertical, or both. Let's go with vertical. Again, select that eye, and we'll put it up there. So you can flip them in different directions. Let's go with horizontal. Again, I will select that eye. So that has just flipped that eye over to the other side. So they are the different options that you have that are sort of slightly extra to what you can get in other programs. Now in the More button here, you do have the option to change the brush sort of types, settings and what have you, much like you can with a normal brush, but I'm not sure, especially for beginners, whether this is a good thing to dabble with, unless you really know what you're doing. I wouldn't touch it myself personally, so I'm going to leave that where it is. And then you have all the different blending modes. But to a large extent, these really don't have too much effect when it comes to the clone brush tool. So really that is about as far as I can take this look at the clone brush tool. I'm hoping you have learnt something from this. There are some options which I didn't know about myself, like the cloning from one picture to another. I only sort of found that out by accident. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.